Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Nickel, and of course, I have Miss America with me here. And I have Gaston. And Tony, the other kitty, well, he's cruising. I always start this way, but in case we've never met, I'm Dr. Jeff Nickel. I'm a veterinarian. I'm specialty trained in veterinary behavior medicine, and after many, many years in general practice, I transitioned my practice to behavior disorders only. And one of the most important things I ever deal with is parental concerns about their children's safety with pets. And it may not necessarily be the family pets. It could be visiting pets, or it might be folks who don't have children, have pets they love and have for many years, and they have a visit from folks who bring their children. And you know, if a pet has not been raised or socialized with little kids right from the get-go, they can be kind of nervous about these little creatures who run around and do so many unpredictable things. And cats, they're pretty good at, sneaking off and getting small. Next week's Facebook Live on Thursday the 21st, we're going to be talking about cats and child safety. Today it's dogs. And I want to start with a story. This is about a family, had a beautiful little girl, and her name was Brittany. In fact, I think it still is. And they have this wonderful boxer named Earl. Well, of course, they had Earl for several years before Brittany came along, and he was very bonded to his mom and dad. So here comes little Brittany. And, it's no big thing for a dog until that little rascal gets mobile. Well, so here she is cruising around, and to just give Earl, and this has been the case since he was a puppy, they had a crate for him in their living room, very comfy little pad in there. And that's where he went when he just needed a break. And, dogs are denning creatures, and that's a good thing for them. So here's little Brittany, and she's cruising around the living room. And Earl's just relaxing, minding his own business. And he's lying down in front of the couch, sort of in the corner of the room. And I know something about it because I ended up making a home visit to help them out with this thing. Anyway, they called my office because just the day before, Earl's camped out in front of the couch on the floor. Here comes Brittany. And suddenly, he lunges, growls, and bites her on the face. Well, this is a big problem. These folks love that dog, but hey, Brittany's their little girl, right? So, of course, immediately, they rush to the urgent care, jump in the car, while one of them's driving, probably unsafely. The other is calling urgent care to saying, we're on our way with our little 2-year-old girl who has a face bite. And they rush in, and of course, fortunately, the staff wasn't terribly busy. They were ready. The doctor and the nurses, they were ready when they blasted through the door. And they put that little girl up on the exam table, and the doctor just looked at her face at every angle with the best light and said, so where's the injury? Well, as it turned out, there wasn't one. What had happened, once we put this whole thing together, was that she was just interested in hugging that dog she loved. And as she approached him and kind of leaned into him, he panicked. And people think, how the heck is that possible? You've got this 50, 60-pound dog, agile, athletic. How is a 2-year-old little girl going to intimidate a dog like that? Well, panic is not a logical thing, and he just got overwhelmed. He didn't really bite. He did growl, which is verbal communication for a dog, which is, you're scaring the daylights out of me, and I need space. But of course, a 2-year-old child doesn't understand that. And so what he did when he lunged was he poked her in the cheek with his nose, and then he jumped over her and took off. She didn't even have a red mark on her cheek, but of course her folks were pretty nervous, and knowing that their little girl hadn't been hurt, what they really needed was, what do we do going forward? What if this dog really did bite her sometime in the future? And what about when she starts inviting her little friends over? Well, these are all pretty darn good questions. So, nowadays we have videos. And I said, I want some video of this dog, just with little Brittany around, just nearby. Please don't set them up for any kind of a panic situation. So they brought me a video. And here's this wire crate in the corner of the living room. And Earl is hanging out in there. And like so many people, they didn't recognize that for that crate to actually function as a den for the dog, it needs to be covered. Well, it wasn't. So here comes little Brittany, wants to go in there and hug Earl because she loves him. And as she encroaches on his private space and crawls into his crate with him, of course they thought, well, this looks great. But I taught them some important things about body language of a dog. And here's Earl. He's leaning away, his ears are back, and he's turning his head away, but he won't take the pupils of his eyes off that little scary monster who's encroaching on his privacy. And he's giving her what we call a whale eye, where the head is turned, but the eye is looking at the perceived threat, and you can see the crescent moon shape of the white part of the eye. That's a scared dog. And, you know, he has a right to his own place. So part of the education that I shared with Brittany's folks was that that little girl can start learning right now about privacy, about boundaries, that other people and dogs, which are a wonderful example of how to get along with others and how to feel kindness and empathy, she can start with that dog. And that little crate of his, it needs to be his own place. And nobody goes in there and messes with him in there. In fact, the go-forward lesson that I really made very clear, and these people were committed, they were willing to make whatever changes were necessary because they loved Earl. And of course their concern was, oh my goodness, we can't keep our dog? Yeah, they can and they have, and it's gone great because they've stuck to the plan. So a big part of this is that that little girl, Brittany, she can interact with Earl all she wants, but the interactions need to actually be on Earl's terms. In other words, he can come to her when he feels safe. So her job is to learn to make allowances for someone who's a little different. And that means that her job is to stand still, or squat, even better. And they got her own treat bag. I always wear one of these when Miss America and I go on hikes, because her job was, and her folks gave her just one treat at a time, kind of like Barney Fife with one bullet. So she had one treat. And her job was to entice Earl. Yes, you'd be Earl if you wanted to be. And when she said, Earl, come and hold out the treat, he would come and earn the food from her. So now she is calling the shots for this dog. And of course, being a dog, his job is to follow what the leader wants and to earn reinforcers for doing that. Well, they're setting her up to be a good pet parent as an adult on top of it. And by her luring Earl to her, she never has to go to him. He never ends up feeling trapped in a corner, which is one of the most common causes of children getting bitten. Studies have shown, and we've got some really good statistical work on this, that children who are bitten by dogs who they know, usually the family dog, it occurs in the home, and it occurs when they approach the dog. And the dog panics, much like Earl did. But of course, sometimes there really are face bites. In fact, over half of them to children are to the head, including the face. And of course, most of the rest of them are to the hands. So we set the pet up to succeed, and we teach the child some wonderful, empathetic, kind life skills at the beginning, all the way through. So what if you have a dog who's pretty shy? Well, you can explain that to the child. You know, a lot of kids are shy, or their friends are. So let's go ahead and set this thing up for teaching that child to be empathic towards somebody who's sort of shy. You're not that shy, are you? So if you have a dog sitting across the room and the child is cautioned, don't be approaching. You have to wait and lure that dog to you with his food and use a simple command. Well, the dog doesn't want to come. So the child can take that little treat, special dog treats, not human food. Let's make a distinction so that they don't overfeed the dog, okay? You put one dog treat at a time in that treat bag on that little child's waist, and they can take the treat and toss it toward the dog. This makes it a game, and in fact, it takes the dog's attention off the child because their eye follows that moving treat, and then they go and they grab it. And then they go, you know, that treat came from that little kid. Maybe there are more. So the parent hands the child another treat or puts another one in the treat bag so the child can have the fun of fishing it out of the treat bag, and then toss another one toward the dog. Now, children usually aren't great throwers yet, but ideally what they would do would be to throw the treat so that it was just a little closer to the child each time, which of course would motivate the dog to overcome some of its fear and approach the child a little closer. And it's important, too, not to let this thing go on too long. You know, little kids have short attention spans. Well, so have dogs. And even adult dogs, you can do obedience training, for example, and carry on a training session for 20 or 30 minutes. But we have very sound research on learning theory in dogs that if we stop a training session at 3 to 4 minutes, the dog is still very enthusiastic about continuing. And so the next time you do any kind of work like this to, in this case, teach the dog that that child is actually a food source, not a bad thing. We do those things only twice a day and only 3 to 4 minutes each time, and they learn much faster and they retain those memories much, much better. And so what do you do the rest of the time? You know, children love pets. And many pets really enjoy being with the children, but at some point, you know, the dog can get a little bit like, hey, I've had enough already. And it is completely acceptable, and in fact, best sometimes to put the dog in the other room, and the child can do other stuff. They don't have to be focused on that dog all the darn time. Now, even sometimes brief exposures, and you've got a dog who's maybe curling its lip, maybe growling, or even a snap, and boy, you know, the impulse is, oh my goodness, I can't let that happen. I'm going to have to put the kibosh on that bad canine behavior right now. Well, hold on. Stop and think for just a minute. Dogs, you know, particularly if it's a family pet, you know from your history that that dog loves us and loves to interact with us. Then why is that going on? Well, number one, the dog might be nervous about the child being that close, and that kind of communication, the snarl, the growl, the raised lip, is not the same as aggression. What it is, in fact, is communication. And that means that that dog is not ready. So you need to give that dog a lot of space. And if you see that kind of thing happening pretty much routinely, and the child really hasn't done anything that you could identify as fear-provoking for the dog, maybe that dog's uncomfortable. That dog might have painful joints or some kind of internal problem, and a physical exam and x-rays might be really helpful. And I have a question here. Oh, Cindy, thank you for checking in. If I take both my dogs for a walk, and one that doesn't like kids growls, and the other one, will the other dog start? Usually not. That kind of a fear response, Cindy, is something that is more commonly very individual. Dogs, particularly young ones like puppies, you know, we've all heard of puppies that can learn house training from the resident adult dog. Just follow them and pick up exactly what they're doing and learn those skills. But dogs don't enjoy being reactive and fearful and defensive and aggressive. And so there isn't any motivation for one dog to follow the example of the other one. If you've got a frightened dog, that dog needs distance. And let me digress on that for just a minute, because I'm glad you brought that up. Very often what parents teach their kids is, well, don't go up and pet a strange dog. Ask that dog's person, is it okay if I pet your dog? That would make sense from the human standpoint, because that's how we would like to be treated, you know. Maybe I want a hug, maybe I don't. Well, but this is a different species. And if they're on a leash, they don't have the option of escaping or avoiding. They're actually trapped by the 6-foot radius of that leash. So if some child comes toward that dog to pet it and the dog has no place to go, well, it could react. So on leash walks, you know, even if you're pretty good at reading body signals from dogs, I would really urge you not to let children approach a dog, period. Really. Now, if you gave a treat to a child who you felt like you could trust, there's always a gamble, but you say, hold this treat and squat down. When the child gets smaller, the dog becomes less prone to perceive a threat. And of course, when the child is squatting, or an adult for that matter, they're less mobile. And so a dog who might be a little nervous has less to worry about. And then the child can hold that treat out and call the dog. And if the dog comes for it, or the child can toss the treat to the dog, that's pretty good. But that child wanted to pet the dog, right? Reaching for the face of some dog we don't know, I think it's a real bad idea, and that's where those hand bites come from. So, yeah, we want children to learn to trust pets, but it should always be done in the context of the pet coming happily and in a relaxed way toward that child to earn a treat. And when they become great friends, then all that great snuggling can start. But just doing that on a walk and you encounter a child, I think that's not that reliable. So here's something that I mentioned in last week's Facebook Live that I really want to reiterate, is we want to do everything we can for pets to be safe with kids. How do we make sure that they're going to be safe? How do we know without question that this dog is safe with children? We all want the dog who will allow a child to flop all over it and roll around on it and pull its ears and all that kind of stuff. There are no guarantees for that. And what you really need to be doing as the supervising adult, and let me reiterate another point I made last week, is that all interactions between children and pets must always be supervised. And it turns out that 60% of the children who have been bitten, it was an adult right there, a parent or a grandparent, and you think, how's that possible? Well, very often these people are paying pretty close attention, but they don't necessarily recognize the signs that the pet's getting uncomfortable, or they're allowing the children to approach the pet. So let's set everybody up for success. And one last point I'm going to make on this is, I didn't bring a leash with me, but Miss America, honey, can you sit up for a minute? If we have a dog with us in our home, and there's always a leash attached to the dog's collar, just a regular 6-foot leash, and you let the dog drag it around the house. Well, we call it a drag line. And if you, the supervising adult, has any suspicion, if that still small voice in the back of your head is saying, should we be worried? And the answer is, yeah. If you're at all concerned, step on that drag line, that leash, because your foot's faster than your hand, and pick it up and lead the dog out of the room and put it in another room. Don't ever gamble, because, Murphy's Law, things go wrong. Well, I'm really glad you joined me for this, and I'm glad my cats did too, because they're sort of a preview of next week, next Thursday night, 6 o'clock Mountain Time, 8 o'clock Eastern. We're going to do a Facebook Live on child safety with cats. And it's actually a pretty different discussion. Cats are not dogs with short ears, any more than our pets are little children in furry suits, right? Their social model is very different than dogs. And when it comes to children, different problems can be serious trouble, and there are different rules for managing them. And so I want to make sure that everybody stays safe and don't try to apply the same rules to anybody. And finally, one last point is that if you find your dog doing something wrong with your children, there's this impulse that we have to reprimand that dog or even grab the dog and try to punish it. Forget this nonsense. The dogs try to dominate people. It is quite rare in a canine social group among dogs. They certainly do that. That's normal canine behavior, but not with people. Very seldom even with little kids. Don't punish, don't yell, don't grab, because the children will learn those behaviors, and they make problems worse with scared dogs. They get more nervous, and they can associate even more fear of being around a little creature that does, unpredictable things, which toddlers, of course, do. And so instead, use that drag line. Leave it on before the dog interacts with the child. Don't run up to the dog to try to attach a leash. Have it on there first. Be preemptive. And then if you get nervous, you just lead the dog out of there and ignore the behaviors you don't want and teach kindness. So if we want to have more questions, let me see if there's... Oh, Cindy, thank you. Kids and my dogs are afraid of them, and don't let them approach us. You always use your best judgment on that stuff. If it's a dog you know well, if it's your own dog. Interestingly, studies have shown that children who are bitten by dogs away from home, then it's the dog who approaches the child most often. When it's in the home, it's usually the child approaching the dog. So you're totally correct, but they should never run from a dog, because sometimes that predatory instinct kicks in and the dog chases. One last point, and I'll put this in my Facebook page that you can find this. There's this wonderful product called Spray Shield. It's this short little, if I thought of it, I'd have brought it so I could show it to you now. Little aerosol can, about this high, very light, has a belt clip. does not have pepper spray or mace or some other irritant. It isn't tear gas. It's a citronella spray. And it actually does not come out of there like a spray. It comes out of there like a bead. It has a range of about 15 feet, and it's accurate. And I use it sometimes on leash walks with Miss America here, because if we're on the ditch, off leash, because dogs need that, and some big dog comes along, I just whip this stuff out and squirt the dog. They hate the smell. We don't have a problem with citronella, but dogs just can't stand it. And in fact, if you've got your children out and here comes a dog, spray that dog with the spray shield is what it's called. You can get it online, but I'll put the URL for it in my Facebook page. So, oh, and Anne's here too. Anne, thank you so much. Anne keeps showing up. She has a wonderful cat named Charlotte, and next week is, well, we'll talk about Charlotte, darn it. and anybody who wants to get my weekly newspaper column, we call it media, and my weekly blog and my weekly videos, including these, in case you missed them, you can get them on my website, and all you have to do is go to Dr. Jeff Nichol, drjeffnichol.com. It's my website, and you can subscribe at no charge. And when you do, you're going to get that stuff every Tuesday. Plus, you'll get my at-home pet first aid and CPR guide. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. Jeff Nichol, along with Miss America, who's gotten small here. And Tony, I don't know if you can see him, and Gaston, he's right here next to me. Thanks.